Imagine a misty 9th century morning. A cold wind chills the inhabitants of a small coastal village somewhere in England to the bone. From the gray haze, silhouettes emerge silently, like ghosts. Long, narrow ships with dragon heads on their prows. Drakkars. On board, bearded giants in helmets and wielding axes. The terror of the north. Vikings. They bring death and ruin. The villagers' hearts sink into their boots. They are already saying goodbye to their lives. But something is not right. The Viking leader, a massive Jarl in a bearskin cloak, doesn't shout a battle cry. He stares at his palm, where a strange glowing rectangle lies. He frowns, pokes it with his finger, and roars at his neighbor. "Odin, that idiot took us through a toll fjord again. I set the preferences to avoid them. I swear on my enemy's skull I'm giving him a 1-star rating." What if the Vikings had Uber? It sounds like the start of a bad joke, right? But let's set the laughter aside for a moment and think seriously. What if the most groundbreaking technology of the 21st century, the sharing economy, embodied in a simple smartphone app, ended up in the hands of the most ferocious and enterprising seafarers of the Dark Ages? This isn't just a funny image. It's a scenario that could have not just changed, but literally turned the entire history of Europe on its head. Ratings instead of runes, surge pricing instead of favorable winds, and the ability to order a raid in a couple of clicks. Today, we'll explore how a single mobile app could have made the Vikings not just the terror of the seas, but the world's first global superpower. So get comfortable, order yourself a Drakkar Comfort, and let's go. So, to begin, let's imagine the app itself. Let's call it, say, DrakkarGo. How would it work in the reality of 9th century Scandinavia? The interface would, of course, be adapted. Instead of a map with streets, you'd have a sea chart with fjords, islands, and known trade routes. Instead of choosing a car class, you'd choose a vessel class. Let's imagine the most basic tier. We'll call it Carl Economy. This is a small, well-worn gnar with space for 10 to 15 people. It might leak a little, and the rowers are yesterday's teenagers who have never held anything heavier than an oar. But it's cheap. Perfect for sailing to a neighboring island for fish or visiting your aunt in another fjord. No frills, just getting from point A to point B. Next up is the Jarl Comfort Plus tier. Oh, this is a different matter entirely. A magnificent skeed, long, fast, with an artfully carved dragon head that inspires awe and respect. On board, only experienced, proven warriors with high ratings. And as a bonus, the client is offered a horn of the finest mead and the opportunity to choose the music for the journey. Songs of victory or battle hymns. Expensive, prestigious, and ideal for a diplomatic mission or a show-of-force raid on a wealthy monastery. This is status. And of course, the star of the show, the Berserker-Pool tier. A concept brilliant in its essence and terrifying in its execution. This is when you share a ride, that is, a raid, with other random Vikings to save money on renting a Drakkar. Picture it. You, a respectable merchant, get into the boat. Next to you sits a grim fellow who spends the whole trip sharpening his axe and muttering something about Odin. On your other side is a young skald trying to compose a saga about you on the fly and constantly asking stupid questions. And at the prow sits a true berserker who has flown into a battle rage because a seagull stole his piece of dried fish and is now rocking the boat, threatening to drown everyone. The savings are real, but your nerves won't recover. The atmosphere in such a Berserker-Pool would be tense. But the most important thing the DrakkarGo app would bring is the rating system. The great and terrible 5-star system, capable of elevating a simple fisherman to the pinnacle of fame or destroying the reputation of a mighty Jarl. The entire Viking culture, built on honor, glory in battle, and loyalty to one's word, would collide with a world of anonymous reviews and passive aggression. Imagine the conversations. One Viking says to another, "I sailed with Harold Bluetooth yesterday. Well, what can I say? The Drakkar was old, the benches were hard, the mead was watered down, and he was 15 minutes late. I gave him 3 stars. And just like that, the reputation of Harold, the great warrior, starts to plummet. He gets fewer orders and is forced to lower his prices. Or the opposite. A young and unknown lad named Eric. He has no fleet of his own, just his father's old boat. But he is polite, punctual, always helps with luggage, and his boat is clean and smells of pine resin. He quickly earns a 5-star rating. People start choosing him over the old, arrogant Jarls. He saves up silver, buys a bigger boat, and hires rowers. A couple of years later, he is the most popular carrier in the Kattegat. He is the first startup founder of the Viking Age, who disrupted the old business model. This system would give rise to a whole new ethic. A Viking carrier, before setting sail, would say, "If you enjoyed the trip, don't forget to leave 5 stars in the app. And if something's wrong, tell me personally, we'll sort it out. No need to write a bad review right away." Great warriors, conquerors of the seas, would become hostages to customer service. Now let's move from everyday trifles to truly global matters. How would DrakkarGo change the economy and the very nature of raids? The answer, radically. Raids would cease to be spontaneous or clan-based enterprises. They would become a business, a gig economy. The app could analyze data in real time. For example, scouts returning from England enter information. Monastery at Lindisfarne. Guards, 5 men, 2 of them old. Valuables, approximately 100 silver marks. Walls are dilapidated. The app processes this and posts a gig. Team required for a raid. Potential loot? High. Risk level? Low. Difficulty multiplier? 1.2. Any available Drakkar captain can see this gig. He can accept it. But the app also shows him other options. Raid on Paris. Risk? Very high. Potential loot? Legendary. Requires a fleet of 50 ships. And now captains start forming project groups to complete these particularly large orders. This completely changes the social structure. Power shifts from those with more land and warriors by birthright to those with higher ratings who complete gigs more efficiently. A Jarl who sits in his hall feasting loses influence. Meanwhile, his former rower, an enterprising lad with a perfect rating, becomes the new center of power. He can charter dozens of ships through the app, organize logistics, and take the lion's share of the profit as the project manager. This is the decentralization of power. Every Viking with an oar and a smartphone in his pocket is a potential entrepreneur. And this applies not only to raids, but also to trade. Merchants could post orders for the delivery of goods. Need 100 barrels of herring delivered from Norway to York, payment on arrival. And dozens of captains immediately start competing for this order, offering lower prices. The market becomes incredibly efficient. Transportation prices fall, and trade volumes grow exponentially. The Scandinavian economy, thanks to this logistical revolution, could have become the most developed in Europe. But let's think about the global consequences. What would have become of the Vikings' greatest historical achievement? The discovery of America. In our reality, it was, in essence, an accident. Leif Erikson was blown off course on his way to Greenland and stumbled upon a new land, which he called Vinland. They founded a small settlement there, but ultimately couldn't sustain it. The connection was too unstable, the logistics too complex. Now imagine this moment with DrakkarGo. Leif Erikson arrives on an unknown shore. The first thing he does is open the app. There's no signal, but the GPS on his device works offline. He drops a pin on the map and names the location Vinland. He returns to Greenland and doesn't just tell sagas about a land where grapes grow on their own. He shares the geolocation. A new, unexplored route appears in the app. The most daring captains see an opportunity. A new continent, no competition, an untapped market. What begins is not just colonization, but a veritable 9th century gold rush. Hundreds of ships head west. The app allows them to coordinate their actions, plot optimal routes, and avoid storms tracked by other ships in real time. The settlements in Vinland become not pitiful camps, but thriving ports. After all, they now have a permanent and cheap logistical link to their homeland. Need to bring livestock? Post a gig on DrakkarGo. Need tools and weapons? A ship will arrive in 3 weeks. From America to Europe comes timber, furs, and new types of food. From Europe to America come colonists, technology, and livestock. 500 years before Columbus, a counterpart to the United States could have arisen in North America. The Scandinavian United States, with cities named New Oslo or West Kattegat. And when Columbus finally reached the New World, he wouldn't have been met by natives, but by bearded Vikings offering him their app to order a taxi to the nearest city. History would have taken a completely different path. But if you think the influence of DrakkarGo would be limited to creating a prosperous Scandinavian America, you are deeply mistaken. The most dramatic, bloody, and fateful changes would have occurred not across the ocean, but in the very heart of the Old World, in Europe. Because the app would have changed not just trade, it would have changed war. In our history, Viking campaigns were terrifying but often chaotic. The Great Heathen Army, which invaded England in 865, was a marvel of organization for its time, but it was still a cumbersome and slow coalition of different bands. Now imagine that same army, but managed through DrakkarGo. It's no longer a horde, it's a swarm. King Alfred of Wessex, the great defender of England, receives a report. Viking ships spotted off the coast of Kent. He hastily assembles his forces and rushes south to fight them off. But while he is on his way, his own smartphone, which he managed to trade for a year's supply of cattle, starts going crazy. Dozens of notifications. Your enemy, Ivar the Boneless, has started a raid at East Anglia. Your enemy, Halfdan Ragnarsson, has started a raid at Northumbria. Your enemy, Bjorn Ironside, is landing in Mercia. This would be history's first blitzkrieg, a lightning war conducted centuries before the word was even invented. Alfred wouldn't be able to face one large army. He would have to face dozens of coordinated, perfectly synchronized strikes across the entire country. How can you defend a coastline when the enemy appears everywhere at once? The answer is, you can't. An app that shows undefended areas would turn England into a buffet for raiders. Every monastery, every town, every village is a pin on the map with its defense level and potential loot specified. Resistance would be broken not in years, but in months. England wouldn't just be partially conquered, as happened with the creation of the Danelaw. It would be completely absorbed and integrated into the Scandinavian world. There would be no King Alfred the Great, who went down in history as the savior of the nation. At best, he would be remembered as the DrakkarGo user with the lowest territory defense rating. And what about the rest of Europe? Charles the Bald, King of West Francia, stands on the walls of Paris and watches in horror as the Viking fleet approaches. In our history, the siege of Paris was an epic, long, and grueling event. With DrakkarGo, it would be different. Charles opens the app, hoping to hire some mercenaries for defense. And what does he see? Attention! Increased demand for raid services in the Paris area. Fares are temporarily increased by 3.5x. Surge pricing in action. Moreover, the Vikings could manage the siege like a modern logistics project. Order for provisioning the army. Order for delivery of siege engines. Reinforcements of 100 warriors needed, premium rate. The siege transforms from a military art into supply chain management. Paris would inevitably fall, and after it, the rest of France. The coastline from Denmark to Spain would become one continuous zone of Scandinavian influence, dotted with DrakkarGo hub ports. But the most interesting part is the world's reaction to this new power. The Vikings' main enemy, besides kings, was the Christian church. For monks and priests, the Vikings were the scourge of God, a punishment for sins. Now imagine how they would react to the technology behind their success. A glowing rectangle that grants inhuman capabilities for coordination and destruction. This isn't just an enemy weapon. It's a devil's artifact, the work of Loki himself. The first information war in history would begin. Priests from their pulpits would curse the talking stones and devil's maps, calling on their flock to destroy them. Meanwhile, the Vikings, being pragmatic folk, simply saw it as a convenient tool. It would be a clash of faith and technology, superstition and efficiency. And here's where it gets really interesting. What happens when a desperate Christian ruler, seeing his kingdom fall apart, decides that the only way to defeat the devil is to use his own weapons? Imagine a secret meeting. The king, disguised as a commoner, meets with a smuggler who is willing, for a huge sum, to sell him a captured smartphone with DrakkarGo installed. The king starts using the app, at first for reconnaissance. He sees where the Viking fleets are heading and manages to prepare an ambush. It works. Then he goes further. He sees that the Vikings are not a unified monolith. They are thousands of independent drivers competing with each other, and he starts hiring them. A gig appears in the app. Sink Jarl Olaf's Drakkar, anonymous. Payment, double rate. And some poor Viking who needs money to repair his boat sees this gig and thinks, well, Olaf was always an arrogant bastard and his rating is 3.4 stars. Business is business, and he takes the job. Vikings start fighting each other for the money of European kings. DrakkarGo transforms from a tool of conquest into the world's first platform for private military companies. The great Viking army is eaten away from the inside by the logic of the free market and anonymous contracts. Entire guilds of Viking mercenaries emerge, working for the highest bidder, whether it's an English king, a Frankish duke, or even the Byzantine emperor. And here we arrive at another global shift. In our history, the Vikings reached Constantinople and served in the emperor's Varangian guard. They were elite, but few, bodyguards. But with DrakkarGo, the Byzantine emperor, the richest man in the known world, gains access to a bottomless market of first-class mercenaries. Does he need to quell a rebellion in Bulgaria? He simply posts a gig for province pacification with the tag Dachart Urgent. A week later, a fleet of 200 Drakkars appears off the coast of Bulgaria, ready to do the job. This changes the balance of power throughout the Mediterranean. The Byzantine Empire, using the inexhaustible resource of Scandinavian mercenaries, could experience a new renaissance instead of declining, reclaiming territories in Italy and North Africa. The Arab Caliphate would face an enemy that could transport thousands of fierce northern warriors to any point on the coast in a matter of weeks. The Silk Road, which ended in Constantinople, would also feel the impact of the new technology. Merchants from Samarkand and Baghdad, arriving in the capital of Byzantium, would be surprised to find that their goods could not just be sold, but shipped further to any point in Europe using the strange but incredibly efficient service of the bearded northerners. The route from the Varangians to the Greeks would turn into a high-speed digital highway. But what if this technology went even further east? What if someone decided to create Silk Road Go? History was preparing to take another, most unpredictable turn. Imagine this world we've created. North America is a prosperous Scandinavian colony. England and France are provinces of a vast northern empire, ruled not by kings, but by a board of directors composed of the highest-rated DrakkarGo captains. The Byzantine Empire, pumped up with the muscle of Varangian mercenaries, is experiencing a renaissance and pushing the Arabs south. The world is already unrecognizable, but the most significant change would have occurred not on the map, but in people's minds. The DrakkarGo technology, that glowing rectangle, would become the most desired and most dangerous artifact in the world. It would bring not only wealth, but also knowledge. After all, what is a smartphone with GPS and access to a global network? It is essentially a portable Library of Alexandria, capable of updating itself in real time. Let's imagine a young, curious monk in an Irish monastery that miraculously survived another raid. On the body of a fallen Viking, he finds this strange device. At first, he considers it diabolical, but curiosity gets the better of him. He spends hours trying to figure out how it works. And one day, by chance, he finds not the rating app, but something else. A database. A Wikipedia of its time, built into the system. He reads about hygiene and understands that diseases are caused not by miasmas, but by tiny creatures invisible to the naked eye. He reads about the basic principles of astronomy and sees that the Earth is a sphere revolving around the sun. He finds blueprints and descriptions of technologies 1,000 years ahead of his time. Gunpowder, the printing press, the steam engine. For him, this would be a revelation comparable to a miracle. He understands that the Viking gods, Odin, Thor, Loki, are just names in a mythological database. And his own world, his entire picture of the universe, turns out to be just a small part of something immeasurably larger. What will he do with this knowledge? Most likely, he would be deemed a heretic and a madman. But the seed of doubt would be sown. And that seed, thanks to the very same DrakkarGo network, could spread with incredible speed. Merchants using the app for trade begin to exchange not only goods, but also ideas. Someone from Byzantium brings not only silk to Norway, but also the foundations of Roman law. Someone from Scandinavian America sends sketches of unseen animals and plants, giving birth to biology. The technology created for plunder inadvertently becomes the catalyst for the first global renaissance. The scientific revolution begins not in the 17th century, but in the 10th. And what would become of the Vikings themselves? Their society, built on strength and glory, would transform into the first meritocracy in history, where your success depends not on your birth, but on your rating and entrepreneurial spirit. But this system has a dark side. It's a world of total surveillance and digital control. Every step you take, every journey, every transaction, everything is recorded in the app. A Jarl can track the location of his every warrior. A wife can check if her husband really went to trade fish or if he went on another Berserker-Pool trip with his friends. The first hackers appear, skilled individuals who can boost a rating or erase a journey history. A black market for 5-star accounts emerges. Society becomes incredibly efficient, but at the same time, incredibly transparent and devoid of personal space. The concepts of honor and one's given word are replaced by a rating and a public review. The saga of a hero now sounds like this, and he completed 127 successful raids, and his average rating was 4.9, and he had not a single negative review. Doesn't sound quite as epic, does it? Ultimately, the Viking Age as we know it would end before it truly began. The ferocious warriors would turn into efficient managers. Their society would become the world's first technocratic state, a global corporation for providing logistical and military services. Their culture, religion, and epic poems would be assimilated and supplanted by a more efficient, global digital culture. They would have conquered the world, but they would have lost themselves, dissolving into the very system they created. And so, 1,000 years later, we, their descendants, would be sitting not in cozy apartments, but perhaps in stylized longhouses with fiber-optic cables. We wouldn't be ordering pizza through an app, but perhaps getting dried meat delivered by drones shaped like ravens. The world would be different, more technologically advanced in some aspects, and perhaps more culturally homogeneous in others. But one question would remain unanswered. Who gave the Vikings this technology? Was it a bizarre time loop, a gift from some programmer god? Or maybe it was just an experiment by some time traveler who dropped his smartphone in a fjord, and a curious Viking found it and managed to charge it with a lightning bolt that struck Thor's hammer. The story of the Vikings with Uber is not just a funny absurdity. It's a mirror in which we see ourselves. We see how technology changes our values, our economy, and even our concepts of honor and glory. And looking at that imaginary Jarl angry about bad service and threatening to leave a 1-star review, we might ask ourselves, haven't we all become a little bit like Vikings sailing the digital sea in pursuit of a high rating? The answer, perhaps, is right now, in the glowing rectangle in your palm.